planty people, it's Krista with Botanical Bird, and this week I want to talk about just different tips and tricks that I've gathered over time, that I've read from other people, that people have advised to me, and kind of just share them with you so that we can have hopefully the healthiest, happiest plants possible. So I definitely have not come up with all of these tips and tricks. I have watched them, learned them, heard them from other people, and from my own experience. I will do my very best to credit everyone where credit is due, but unfortunately I can't remember a lot of them, so I'll try to just shout out generally to who I think it was if I didn't come up with it myself. There's a few categories of tips I have. The first one is when to water a plant. I feel like this is just so important because overwatering and underwatering are some of the easiest things to do that can really harm our plant, especially overwatering. Can't be undone as well as underwatering. Also, general plant health, tips on keeping your plants just healthy kind of in general, and then helping to keep your plant care as simple as possible. So let's get started. When to water a plant. This can vary based on the type of plant, obviously, but just some general tips that I use. I think the most effective way to figure out if your plant needs water is to use your finger and stick it as far down in the pot as possible. There's definitely other tips and tricks I'm going to mention, but I have found personally that this is the most accurate method for me. And it's simple. You don't have to buy it. You have your finger with you everywhere you go. And using your finger to check the moisture in the soil, I believe I heard from Plantarina. So thank you very much. That is something I've been doing for a long time because of her. So thank you, Amanda. Also, another method that I use to tell if my plants need water, I find that it's less messy but also less effective, is using a hydrometer. You just stick it in the soil and it's on a scale of 1 to 10, at least mine is, from the most dry to the most moist soil. And so you just stick the probe down as far as you can or as far as you think that the roots are, and it'll tell you more or less how moist the soil is. Another tip that I have read, maybe it was from a video on Facebook, I think, was using a chopstick, so like something wooden, and sticking it in the soil and pulling it out and seeing if it's moist at all. I thought that that was pretty clever too. I haven't ever done it, but it sounded like a good idea. Another method I use is for some of my bigger plants, or kind of just depending on the plant, the soil will start to pull away from the edges of the pot when it's really thirsty because the roots are trying to suck up as much moisture as possible. So if I kind of look down in the pot and it looks like the soil is being kind of pulled inward, it's usually time for a good watering. And last, this one took the most time for me to learn how to do. It's like weighing the pot in your hands. So this is something I will sometimes do as like a secondary measure with some of my smaller plants. Like if it's too big, if I can't pick it up, I'm not gonna worry about it. But if I kind of stick my finger in the soil and it kind of seems moist, but maybe it's time for some water, I'll pick up the pot and kind of just like weigh it in my hands. And if it feels more light than normal, it could be time for a good water. And this is something that took me a while longer because like every pot and every plant and the amount of soil kind of are factors in how much a pot like weighs. And so it's not an exact science, but I have found that like that can be the determining factor if I'm like waffling of like, should I water it, should I not? Kind of just like weigh it in your hands. If it feels lighter than it should, then I water it. Moving on to just general plant health. If you see that there's kind of like a yellowing leaf or a dying leaf or something on your plant, I am of the camp that I like to cut it off with clean, sharp shears to prevent the plant from wasting its energy trying to still like save that leaf. I would rather have it spend its energy to continue to provide for the rest of the plant that is doing well and or hopefully push out new growth. There are definitely people who would prefer to leave the leaf until it falls off naturally. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just explaining why I do what I do. Also, I think it looks better when I cut off the dead foliage. Also, I like to aerate my soil with a knitting needle. This is something that I learned also maybe from someone on Facebook, maybe it was from Plantarina. I'm really sorry, I can't remember. I want to give credit to who came up with these things, but I've read or seen that some people use chopsticks. You can really use anything. I use a knitting needle because it's very sturdy and I have several, and so I kind of just stab around gently in the soil. And the purpose of that is to increase the oxygen that gets to the roots, and that can help prevent root rot. Next, this is one that I personally don't do because I'm afraid to like overwater my plants, but it is frequently recommended that when you are watering your plants to kind of give them a shower, and that can be a way to ward off any pests. If there's like pest eggs or anything, if you just wash them off, then that can be a good preventative measure. I personally, when I clean the leaves on my plant, usually keep them where they are, and I get like a moist paper towel and just wipe off all the dust and everything. But I like the idea of putting it in the shower to water it off. That I think was a YouTube recommendation. It could have been from Becca de la Plants or several other people, but that's one that I think sounds like a good idea and it makes sense. Another tip for just general plant happiness is humidity trays for humidity loving plants. This is something that I think I found from Google, but then I put my own spin on it, and the purpose is just to increase the humidity in the air around your plants. I do sell my spin on the humidity tray. I'll put a picture of one here. And so that's available on my website, on our Etsy page, on Facebook Marketplace. We are Botanical Bird on all of those websites, and bird has a U in it, not an I. All right, coming to the final category, making your planty life easier. I feel like this is like a really important category because we all have busy lives. And so as much as I find plant care gives back to me, I also am kind of like, let's streamline this, because with over 100 plants, it tends to be a little time consuming. All right, so first one, the great debate of drainage hole or no drainage hole in your pots. I feel like generally lots of plant people, if you can, you'll look for a pot with a drainage hole. I have switched how I've dealt with this over time. When I was in my early stages of plant parenthood, I would drill holes in pots that didn't have them, and that was fine. Like, it works well. It was just very time consuming and a lot of extra effort, I felt. So now what I've done, thanks to the recommendation of Plantarina, is I am a big fan of the cover pot or cashpo. So let's say that I have a favorite pot that I'm like, oh, I just have to have this pot. I know what plant I want to put in it. It's beautiful. I'm taking it home. But if it doesn't have, and this one actually does have a drainage hole with a plug in it, but if it didn't, I could totally just have an extra nursery pot and then have my plant that's like actually directly in here and just put it in the cover pot. So what you're seeing is still the beautiful cover pot sans drainage hole, but your plant is still in a pot that has great drainage. And Lito approves. Yeah? And while we're on the subject, I definitely think it helps to keep the extra nursery pots that you have from when you're like repotting or anything, because I use them for so many different things. Like if I'm propagating a plant, I'll often put it in a nursery pot, or if you are repotting something and need to upgrade it and you need a larger size, I find that it has been so handy to have those on deck. And maybe not like 10 of every size, but having a couple of every size can be pretty helpful. And it's recycling, so yay! Another tip for general plant care that I really like is watering my plants in the bathtub or the sink. And I find that helpful just because I don't have to go all the way around all of my plants again and dump out the extra water in their plant trays. This is another thing that I have kind of changed over time. In early plant parent times, I would water all of my plants in place, and every single plant had a plant or a water tray beneath it. And I thought that was great because I was like, I don't want to be taking plants to the sink all the time. But then I kind of got frustrated with having to make a second lap around my space and like dumping out all the excess water. So instead now what I do is I'm checking my plants and I take the ones that need to be watered and I put them in the bathtub or the sink and I water them there, and I kind of leave them for a little bit while I check the other plants and then like kind of swap them out. And I find that helpful because all of the water can drain out that needs to in the bathtub and it's not a big deal. And I'm minimizing the amount of mess. Okay, having care cards with each plant's care information with the plant. These are something that I also sell. You can find them on my website, on Facebook Marketplace, on our Etsy page. And they're just like little cards that have the plant's name, their light requirements, their soil requirements, any additional special information, and when to fertilize them. And I found that this was so helpful, especially when I have a lot of plants and they kind of all start to blur together of like, does this plant like to stay slightly moist or consistently moist? Like sometimes it's hard to keep track, and when you're just getting to learn your plants. So I keep these with all of my plants, or if you'd like, they can also just come in a sheet without them being cut, so you can have just a central location to go to. And they're laminated, so if water gets on them while you're watering your plant, it's no big deal. So oftentimes we have those large plants that are simply too heavy to move. I know I dread watering my large plants. And so instead of trying to haul those to the bathtub like I water all the rest of my plants, if I can make it out the door with them, I try that. Or I'll have a water tray below them. And so I'll water them in place and then just use a turkey baster to turkey baste out all of the excess water. It's a little bit of a process, but I feel that that is simpler than trying to like haul a really heavy plant somewhere and then water it from there. My next recommendation is not the cutest, but it is very functional. I think I kind of came up with this, slash it was a mix of maybe Google or some YouTube videos. Once again, I'm really sorry that I can't cite the actual person, but when I'm propagating, I often use humidity bags. It's really just a Ziploc bag. So I have my plant in its pot and I have it just to increase the humidity and help promote the most growth possible. I have it in this humidity bag. Something I've noticed then just through experience is a lot of times like my pot is really small and the humidity bag is big, and so there would be like no opening in the bag, which would then prevent any air from getting in, and that's not good. Like we want to increase the amount of humidity, so kind of cut off the air supply so all the humidity doesn't just escape, but not completely cut it off where no air can circulate. So I started putting in just like, I think this is a piece of a bamboo stake or a chopstick or a knitting needle or anything, just to kind of like keep the bag upright and allow air to get in there. And then I often put the name and the date that I started propagating on here just to keep track of growth and see how it goes. I think spray bottles have made my life a lot easier as far as pest management goes. I will be the first to tell you, I am not the greatest at pest prevention. I do a lot of pest cleanup, unfortunately. I was actually just reading a post on a Facebook plant group about someone who was trying to fight off mealybugs. And if you've ever had mealybugs, you know they are such a pain in the rear end trying to dab at every single little mealybug with the Q-tip. So someone was recommending, why don't you just shoot it with a mixture of whatever pest management method you want in a spray bottle? And that made me think of all of the different Google articles I've read about treating pests in plants and using a spray bottle. So like you mix up whatever you want. It's frequently water, rubbing alcohol, and dish soap, and kind of just mixing it up. And then you can cover a wide area with just a smaller amount of substance, I guess, and it saves a lot on time. So spray bottles. And last but not least, if you have lots and lots of plants and you do have grow lights to kind of increase the amount of light that they get in a day, I was finding that our electricity bill was skyrocketing. And so when we moved and it was time for us to pick what energy plan we wanted, we chose one that had free energy from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. And then we actually switched the 12-hour cycle of the grow lights for the plants. So how I went about this was like a lot of Googling too, but basically what the articles on Google had recommended were to turn off the grow lights for 24 whole hours to get them off of the cycle of getting their 12 hours of light during the day. So leave them off for 24 hours and then then switch basically cold turkey of having the lights on from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And so now I'm only paying for 2 hours of all of my grow lights instead of 12. So I felt like that was pretty genius, and I think my boyfriend had recommended that to me because I was feeling really bad about our electricity bill, and then Google confirmed it and explained how to do it. All right, so that's it for this video. I hope that these tips and tricks are able to help you streamline your plant parenthood or your plant care, make things easier, keep your plants a little bit happier. And I would love to hear your favorite planty tips and tricks that you have gathered over time. Please feel free to put those in the comments below. And if you like this video, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. You can find us on Instagram at botanical_bird. You can find us on our Etsy page for Botanical Bird, our website, botanicalbird.com, and on Facebook Marketplace. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, we're rooting for you. Bye.